The departure hall smelled of coffee, recycled air, and quiet goodbyes. Daniel adjusted the collar of his jacket as he walked through the sliding doors of the international terminal, a grin tugging at his lips that he made no effort to hide. Beside him, Lucia looped her arm through his, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. She was dressed for escape, not travel, her hair loose, her lipstick bold, her laughter too loud for the hour. Daniel liked that. He liked how she made him feel younger, untethered, untouched by the life he was leaving behind for the week. He glanced at his phone. No missed calls, no messages. Good. At home, Sophia would still be asleep, or pretending to be. She always pretended these days. Pretended not to notice the late nights, the sudden trips, the way his affection had thinned into obligation. He had stopped trying to explain himself. It was easier to call it work, easier to call the marriage a mistake in his head and move on. Lucia leaned closer as they approached the check-in counter. "Once we're in the air," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "No interruptions. Just us." Daniel smiled. Just us. What he did not know, what he could not have imagined even in his most paranoid moments, was that the interruption had already begun. 2 floors above them, behind a secured glass door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," Captain Sofia Alvarez stood perfectly still in her crisp navy uniform. Her hair was pulled back into a precise bun, her cap resting under her arm as she stared at the passenger manifest glowing on the screen in front of her. Her name appeared at the top of the list as pilot in command. Beneath it, neatly aligned, were the names of every soul she would be responsible for in the sky today. Daniel Alvarez, Seat 2A, Lucia Moreno, Seat 2B. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing. She did not gasp. She did not flinch. Years in aviation had trained her face into calm, into control. Turbulence never showed on a pilot's expression, no matter how violent it felt inside. Still, her fingers curled slowly against the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening as memory rearranged itself with brutal clarity. The late nights, the canceled anniversaries, the unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirts, the way he had looked through her at breakfast already gone. So this was it. Not a meeting, not a conference, a vacation. With her. Sophia straightened. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, yet composed and unreadable. She had earned this cockpit. Every hour of flight time, every sacrifice, every night, she came home exhausted while Daniel complained about being lonely. He had called her distant once, had laughed and said no man wanted a woman who loved the sky more than her husband. She had said nothing then. She said nothing now. A knock sounded at the door. "Captain Alvarez," a voice called. "Boarding begins in 20 minutes. "I'll be there," Sophia replied evenly. Downstairs, Daniel handed over their passports, barely listening as Lucia chatted excitedly about beaches and room service. He felt light, unburdened. This trip was supposed to be clean, no complications, no guilt. He had told himself Sophia would never find out, that even if she did, she would be too proud, too quiet to make a scene. He did not consider the sky. When boarding was announced, Lucia squeezed his hand. "This is it," she said. "A fresh start." Daniel nodded, stepping onto the jet bridge without looking back. Inside the cockpit, Sophia ran her pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Fuel levels confirmed. Weather reviewed. Systems green. Her voice, when she spoke to the co-pilot, was steady and professional, betraying nothing. As the passengers settled into their seats, she allowed herself one final glance at the manifest. Not out of pain, but out of certainty. This flight would be flawless. By the book. No mistakes. She adjusted her headset, eyes forward, hands resting calmly on the controls. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice echoed through the cabin, smooth and composed, "this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard." In seat 2A, Daniel froze. Lucia's smile faltered. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel lifted his head, every muscle in his body locking into place as just recognition crashed over him like sudden turbulence. That voice. There was no mistaking it. Sophia smiled in the cockpit, unseen, as the plane prepared for takeoff. Daniel did not breathe again until the cabin doors sealed shut. His pulse roared in his ears as Sophia's voice faded into standard safety instructions, each word delivered with flawless calm. Lucia leaned back in her seat, oblivious, scrolling through her phone, already lost in fantasies of sunlit beaches and careless nights. Daniel barely registered her presence now. His world had narrowed to the cockpit door at the front of the plane, that thin barrier separating him from the woman he had betrayed, and the truth he could no longer outrun. This can't be real, he muttered. Lucia glanced at him. What? Nothing, he said quickly, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. Just travel nerves. She laughed and squeezed his thigh, her touch grounding and damning all at once. Daniel stared straight ahead as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The engines hummed, low and powerful, vibrating through his bones. Every sound felt amplified, every second stretched. Up front, Sophia adjusted her instruments, her co-pilot chatting lightly beside her about weather conditions along the route. Sophia responded when necessary, professional and precise, but her thoughts remained razor-sharp. She had imagined confronting Daniel countless times in private, in arguments that ended in slammed doors and tears she never allowed herself to shed. She had never imagined meeting the truth at 30,000 feet, strapped into a uniform that demanded control above all else. She would not break it. Not here, not now. The plane began its ascent, the city shrinking beneath them. Lucia let out a delighted gasp, pressing her face to the window. I love takeoff, she said. It feels like leaving everything behind. Daniel swallowed hard. Leaving everything behind had never felt so impossible. As the seatbelt sign switched off, Sophia exhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of every life on board, a familiar, sobering responsibility. Among them was the man who had once promised to build a life with her, who now sat holding another woman's hand, believing himself untouchable. She reached for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, she said evenly, we have reached cruising altitude. The weather ahead is clear. Now, when our estimated flight time is just under 6 hours, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey. Her voice wrapped around Daniel like a net. Lucia tilted her head. She sounds confident. I like that in a pilot. Daniel did not respond. Minutes passed. Then more. The cabin settled into the rhythm of flight. Drinks were served. Laughter drifted softly from nearby seats. On the surface, everything was normal. Perfect, even. Inside Daniel, panic bloomed. He replayed every cruel word he had ever thrown at Sophia. Every time he had belittled her job, mocked her long hours, dismissed her exhaustion. He had convinced himself she needed him more than he needed her, that she would never leave, never fight back. He had never considered the power she held now. Lucia finally noticed his tension. Daniel, she said quietly, what's wrong with you? He hesitated, then leaned closer. The pilot, he whispered. It's my wife. Lucia stared at him, confusion hardening into disbelief. You're... what? My wife, he repeated, his voice tight. Sophia. Color drained from Lucia's face as understanding clicked into place. She turned slowly toward the cockpit door, then back to him. You said she worked in an office. Daniel closed his eyes. I lied. The silence between them grew thick and dangerous. Up front, Sophia listened to routine communications from air traffic control, her responses crisp and controlled. Yet beneath the calm, a plan was forming, not out of vengeance, but of truth. She would not shout. She would not expose him recklessly. She would let the truth rise on its own, the way altitude revealed the shape of the land below, at precisely the right moment. As turbulence rippled lightly through the cabin, Sophia steadied the aircraft with practiced ease. Her gaze flicked briefly to the passenger camera feed. There he was. Daniel. Smaller than she remembered. Fragile, even. She pressed a button. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her tone unchanged, for those seated in the forward cabin, I will be stepping out briefly after our next systems check. Thank you for your patience. Daniel's heart slammed violently against his ribs. Lucia's fingers trembled in his grip. What does that mean? Daniel had no answer. The cockpit door unlocked with a soft click, and Sophia stood. The cabin went quiet in a way Daniel had never experienced before. It was not silence, not really, but a collective holding of breath. as if every passenger sensed that something irreversible was about to unfold. Anna Sophia stepped out of the cockpit with measured grace, her uniform crisp, her posture unshaken. The gold wings on her chest caught the cabin lights as she walked down the aisle. Every step was deliberate, every second stretched. Daniel felt his body lock in place. Lucia's hand slipped from his as if burned. She stared, wide-eyed, at the woman approaching, the reality of the lie settling into her bones. Sophia stopped beside their row. "Good afternoon," she said politely, her voice calm enough to steady a storm. "I hope you're both enjoying the flight." Daniel could not speak. His mouth opened, closed. No sound came. Lucia stood abruptly, embarrassment and fear flushing her face. I didn't know," she stammered. "He told me he was divorced." Sophia turned her gaze to her, studying her carefully. There was no rage there, only clarity. I know," she said softly. "Men who lie often lie well." A ripple of murmurs passed through the nearby seats. Heads turned, phones subtly lowered. The moment had become public, unavoidable. Sophia looked back at Daniel. "You always said I would never amount to anything without you," she continued, her tone still even. "That no one would respect me, that I needed you to survive." Daniel finally found his voice, thin and cracking. "Sophia, please, not here." "Here is exactly where it belongs," she replied. "High enough that you cannot run, surrounded by witnesses you cannot manipulate." She straightened, addressing the cabin without raising her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. I assure you your flight remains safe. I am simply reclaiming something that was taken from me, my truth." The words settled heavily, but no one objected. No one moved. Lucia sank back into her seat, tears pooling as the full weight of her involvement crushed her. She looked at Daniel with dawning horror. "You said she was nothing," she whispered. "You said she was finished." Sophia allowed herself the smallest breath. "I was rebuilding," she said, quietly, "while you were busy underestimating me." She leaned closer to Daniel, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "This plane, this career, this life, I earned it without you. And when we land, the lawyers will already be waiting. The house, the accounts, the company shares you hid, all documented." His face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "I already did," she said. A chime sounded softly from the cockpit, signaling her return. Sophia stepped back, her composure intact. "One last thing," she added, her eyes steady. You once told me no man would ever want me if I left you." She smiled then, not cruelly but freely. "I stopped needing a man's permission to exist." She turned and walked back up the aisle. The cockpit door closed behind her with finality. The rest of the flight passed in stunned quiet. When the plane touched down hours later, the landing was flawless. Daniel remained seated long after others stood to disembark. The life he had built on lies collapsed around him. Lucia left without a word, her suitcase rolling away like a verdict. Sophia stayed in the cockpit for a moment longer, her hands resting on the controls, her heart steady. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she belonged.